I'd like to welcome you all to this seminar series on advanced transportation technologies. This is being broadcast live, and because of that, whenever you ask questions, you will have to use the microphone so people who are not here in the room will hear what you have to say. It is being live streamed, and the other thing that I want to note is there are about a dozen of you who are taking this for credit, and in order to take this course for credit, you're going to have, there's some requirements associated with that, and because this is the first day, I'm going to spend a few minutes going over what you need to do in order to get that one seminar credit. You will have to attend 10 of the 11 seminars that are going to be broadcast this semester. You will have to write a short 2-page memo summarizing and highlighting the key points made by the speaker. And you will do that for 7 of the 10 seminars. In other words, there are 11 seminars. You must attend 10 of them. And 7 of those 10, you need to write a 2-page summary. That summary will be due on the Wednesday after the seminar. So the seminar is on Thursday, will be on Thursdays, and the following Wednesday by 1 p.m., you will have to email your summary to Kylie. You want to lift your hand. For those of you who are in the room, you can see who Kylie is in the back. Her email address is in a syllabus. The syllabus is posted on the ME department course website, and you can download it there, or you can get it from Kylie, who has copies in the back of the room. Everybody here is being asked to sign in. There is a sheet that's going to go around the room. For those of you who are students and just taking this for credit, put your name down as a student, but please, everybody, enter your email address. Next week, after the seminar, I will be taking pictures of the students in the class because I'd like to be able to associate a name with a face, and the only way I can do that, and the only way Kylie can do that, is if we have your picture. And those of you who are going to tell me that it's all available from registration, usually that picture's from when you were a freshman, and I typically cannot recognize freshman pictures and associate with the way you look today. Other things, there is, for those of you who might need some help with writing, the university has student writing support, and if you look in your the syllabus that you can pick up, there's a website. Their job is not to proofread your 2 pages that you prepare, but they will help you figure out what you need to do to proof your own work. If you go to that website, you'll see what they will do and what they won't do, but it is important for you guys to be able to summarize and highlight important messages when you hear it, and just think of your boss is having you write a summary of what you heard, and you want to make sure that your boss understands and gets the key points made by a speaker. Other things that I want the students to know, if you have any questions, please come see me after the seminar is over, and we can deal with those issues after the seminar so we don't trouble all the professionals and everyone else who's attending with course-related issues. Any questions that are burning right now? Okay. So if there are no more questions, what I want to do is introduce our speaker of the day, Janet Creaser. Janet basically finished her master's in 2004 at the University of Calgary. Her expertise is in perception, aging, and cognitive ergonomics. I've worked with her ever since she joined the university in 2004, And so this August was 10 years since she joined us, and she's worked on God knows how many different projects. But I think one of the more significant projects is the one she's going to talk about today. And I will basically hand it over to her, and she'll be talking about a very significant teenage driver project that she's been working on for, I don't quite remember even how many years we've been on this.
I will talk about that.
Okay, so without further ado, Janet Creaser.
Thank you, Max. Yes, I got a head nod back there. Okay. For anyone not in the room, I'm wearing 2 microphones. As Max said, this project has been ongoing for quite a number of years. We started in 2005 with a prototype concept of how we could support teen drivers in the vehicle in real time. One of Max's former graduate students put a computer and a modem and a bunch of stuff in the back of a car, looked at the risk factors that teens were experiencing, and figured out ways to provide them feedback in the vehicle and send that information out to their parents. And it's a very high-level thing. We've done 2 more projects since then related to the usability of the system, and then moving it on to actually when the Android platform came out, moving it onto the smartphones. So I will talk about all that throughout the presentation. I will start out with just a big thanks to the research team. This is the current research team. We've certainly had a number of other members of the team over the years. These are the people who are actively working on the project right now. And the project I'm talking about today has been ongoing for about 3 years. And we've just wrapped up our data collection in July. And that is why I'm here today to explain this to you and talk about it. We've been very fortunate to have sponsorship by Minnesota Department of Transportation. They're a very forward-thinking DOT, very innovative in the safety area. And we are thrilled that they were interested in this concept to help keep teen drivers safer and provided the funding for this project. So what is the impetus for a project like this? In the driving world, it's well known that teen drivers have the highest rate of traffic fatalities amongst any other age group. So they represent a very small proportion of the drivers in the country, but they represent a significant proportion of the number of fatal crashes. There are a lot of reasons for that. Teen drivers tend to be very inexperienced, number one. The catch-22 of driving is that it's very easy to learn how to operate a motor vehicle. It's very difficult to learn things like hazard perception and risk perception and understanding what safe speeds are, for example, in a curve or in bad weather, and adjusting your behavior appropriately. And a lot of that stuff is age-related. So we do see a lot of speeding behaviors in teens. That's linked to teen personality characteristics like risk. So you always hear about young males. I'm sorry, guys, but you're a little more risky than the young women. So, you know, you add a little bit of risk, a little bit of fun, a car perhaps that you love to drive, and then you guys go, people are out there speeding. So alcohol is still a significant factor across traffic safety. It still represents about 30% of fatal traffic crashes. For all drivers, it's also a significant factor for teen drivers. We do not address it in this project, but I always like to bring it up just to let people know that it is still a factor, despite the fact that we have a 21 drinking age here in the United States. Aggressive driving is anything like excessive acceleration, hard braking, often accompanied by speeding. So if you take a curve too fast, you're going to pull a lot of G's in that curve and get an excessive maneuver. So, and in worst case scenario, you go off the road. Worst case scenario, you brake really hard, but you still hit the car in front of you, things like that. So that's one aspect. Distracted driving, I'm sure you all have heard quite a bit about distracted driving in the last few years, particularly with the increase in the number of people carrying smartphones and mobile devices in their vehicles. We also see lots of other fun things like hair brushing. I saw a guy shaving one day while he was driving with an electric razor. So I've seen lots of interesting things on the road. But for teens, they are an increasing part of the smartphone market. When we started the project about 3 years ago, it was estimated that for teenagers ages 16, 17, they had about 50% of them owned a smartphone already. At the end of this project, that estimate is about 70% of teens own a smartphone. So they have them, they're using them, and I actually have some nice data to show you that they do use them while driving. and we'll see that later. So it is a problem not just for all drivers, but for teen drivers as well. And then you throw in inexperience, you throw in risk-taking, you throw in poor hazard perception, and it's a big recipe for disaster for them. Other passengers are often a problem for teen drivers. So anything that distracts you. If you're not experienced in a task, and someone's like poking you or distracting you or laughing or making fun or taking your eyes off the road, you're going to have a problem. I mean, even I have trouble with that. I have, kids in the back seat and they distract me from driving. So throw some teens in the car, same problem. Teens are still one of the groups that is less likely to use their seatbelts. This is more common in rural areas. There's still a culture. Although Minnesota has a very high seatbelt use rate, it's over, I believe it's 89–90% for the state. There are still pockets of groups of people that have lower rates, and teen drivers are often one of those groups. And I mentioned inexperience already. So what all these things do is they work together or independently to increase the risk of a teen dying in a crash. And you might say seatbelts don't cause crashes. Well, no, they don't. But if you're not wearing a seatbelt, you're way more likely to die. So that's why it's a fatality risk. So what's been done so far to keep teens safe? Well, parents have always been the front line of defense. They've been the ones that driver educators have relied on to make sure that they go out and do all that extra driving with you to make sure that you're able to handle the vehicle appropriately. They hope that parents and teens have good conversations in cars. I don't know. It was horrible learning to drive from my mother, and parent involvement is good, but parents need help too. And that's one of the things we'll talk about today. But parent involvement in teen driving and in limiting their behaviors, where they drive, when they drive, who they drive with, reduces their risk. Spending more time behind the wheel with them reduces their risk. So we know parents are important. Most states here in the United States have graduated driver licensing laws. Minnesota actually has a fairly good graduated driver licensing law. What that means is teens who are newly licensed under the age of 18 are subject to a number of limitations. So you can't drive after midnight by yourself. You're not allowed to make any phone calls while driving. So in the state of Minnesota, texting is illegal for all drivers. So I'm not allowed to text, you're not allowed to text, teen drivers are not allowed to text. I'm still allowed to make a phone call, whether handheld or hands-free. Teen drivers under the age of 18 are not allowed to make any phone calls while driving. So they're exempted from that. There are passenger rules. So for the first 6 months, you can only have one other teen passenger under the age of 20 in your car. Siblings are exempt from that, and that can cause problems too. So it is known to work, though. Graduated driver licensing works. It reduces the number of traffic fatalities that we have amongst teens. So now what can we do with technology? Technology can also play a role in teen driver safety. And what's been done historically is often, a lot of the devices that are on the market right now only look at acceleration data. So they put an accelerometer in the car, and they just determine whether you pulled a certain G-force, usually 0.5 G, in a curve or braking or accelerating. And then one of the most common ones takes a video of 10 seconds prior to the event, 10 seconds after, and it sends a report a week later to your parents. Well, in psychology, we know that providing feedback that far after a behavior is not as effective. They do see reduced rates of those particular risky behaviors with that system. But in psychology and in behavioral training, anyone who's had, I think it even goes true for animals, pets, dogs, toddlers, the quicker you can provide feedback, the more likely you are to have success in changing the behavior. So that's one of the things that technology can do in the vehicle, and one of the things that we do with our teen driver support system. So you can provide real-time, context-specific coaching in the vehicle to the teen. It provides them assistance beyond the limited driving experience they get in driver's education. It also helps reinforce the laws that they're subject to. The other thing you can do with a piece of technology is you can try and block risky behaviors. So obviously, if you can't do it, you can't be at risk from it. So if you absolutely can't make a phone call or a text message while driving, you're not going to pick up your phone and you're not going to do it, so you're not going to be distracted from it. And the other thing, I talked about the importance of parents in influencing teen driving. The system can report to parents. So most of these systems that are out there, including ours, reports to parents. They tell you what was going on, what happened, and what they're trying to do is get the parent to be a coach in talking to their teen about their driving. And it also makes the parents more aware of what their teens are doing while they're driving. And it also helps reinforce amongst parents what is safe driving behavior, because not all parents necessarily know all the laws or are very good about talking about it. but if you can provide them with some extra information, they might have more of an impetus to do that. So the system that we developed, it runs on a smartphone. Like I said, our first prototype version was on a computer in the back of a car. Then smartphones came along, and we had a very talented graduate student who hacked a smartphone before they had open source code. And then Android came on the market and made life a lot easier for us. Apps started being developed. And now we are able to create this application on the smartphone. And what we do is we leverage the capabilities of the smartphone to provide this feedback to teens and parents. So we use the accelerometers on the phone, we use the GPS on the phone, and we use the data capabilities and the text messaging capabilities on the phone to provide this comprehensive suite of feedback for the parent and teens. So what our system does is we provide advanced notification of changes in speed limits. We provide advanced notification when we have it in our map of curves, upcoming curves. I already talked about if you're speeding too quickly through curves. It's nice to know about those ahead of time so you can slow down on time. Then what we do is we do real-time monitoring of speeding. So we have a speed database that is loaded onto as part of the software package. And the phone figures out where you are driving. It matches it to the database, finds out what the speed limit is in the database, presents that speed limit to you. So if it's 30 miles per hour, it'll show you 30 miles per hour. If you start to speed a bit, you get graduated warnings. And I'll show you in the next slide. I have some pictures, and we'll talk a little more about that. Aggressive driving, we use the accelerometers on the phone to do that. Smartphones are a little trickier to do accelerometer data collection. Other devices that are aftermarket devices, they're bolted onto the vehicle. So it doesn't move. You always know that it has a stable platform and your accelerometers are oriented in a specific position. With a smartphone, you don't have that. So what we do with our algorithm is we actually require that the phone be mounted upright in a mount, and our algorithm detects if the phone is in that position and if it's stable. And if it's not, then we're not able to provide these alerts. The nice thing is that for our data analysis and collection period, when we have excessive maneuvers in the vehicles, we know that they're excessive maneuvers. The downside is if the phone is not mounted, this is a particular behavior that we can't actually alert for the teen driver. Talked about distracted driving. We, through our software application, we turn off the notifications for calling and texting. So you don't get any sound, vibration, or visual alerts when a call comes in or a text comes in. And then you also can't call out. So what our software does is it launches it's paired with a Bluetooth device in the vehicle, and it launches automatically when you power on the car. So you turn on the car, power goes to the Bluetooth device, it pairs with the phone, and the software launches automatically. And what we do with that software is I'm not a software engineer, I'm a psychologist, and I'm giving you the best explanation I can from our engineers. We sort of brute force run our teen driver support system in the foreground of the phone. So if you push your home button on the phone, you'll briefly see your window, but before you're able to do anything on it, the teen driver support system launches itself again and continues to run in the foreground. So you can't actually interact with the screen on the phone. We have, in our particular field operational test that we ran over the last year, we had extra sensors in the car where we looked at seatbelt use and we looked at passenger detection. That can't be done easily just on the smartphone. We did it as a demonstration purpose and to provide more information about whether this type of monitoring works for teens, if you can have additional seatbelt monitoring or additional passenger monitoring for teens. For example, if vehicle manufacturers wanted to implement that kind of technology in their vehicle, this allows a little more data. Or if sensors get more robust and easier to put in cars aftermarket, then we could do that as well using a smartphone app. Let's see. And we support Minnesota GDL. I talked about passenger cell phone. Curfew is the big thing. We provide a curfew alert. So our feedback to parents is text messaging. If you drive after curfew, you go out with your phone and it's on and you get in the car and it launches and you're driving after midnight or between midnight and 5 a.m., your parents are going to get a nice text message, hopefully not at 2 in the morning, and they'll know where you are and what you were doing. So we do that. All of these behaviors that I'm talking about here and the way that we monitor them and the way that we alert them, it's evidence-based research that's led to this. So there's been a lot of research in teen driver risk. There's been a lot of research, obviously, in behavioral psychology and how to change behavior and what kind of feedback that you can do. And then from a usability standpoint, we've done a lot of usability work to make sure that the visual and auditory messages that we present to the teen are not distracting to them. Because, of course, we don't want to put a technology in the car that is supposed to be a safety technology, but then actually reduces safety. So we've done all of that work ahead of time before deployment and can say that we have done this. So how does it work? So we have little Joe Teen here in his car, and he's going for a drive. Poor kid's not wearing his seatbelt. So what we do, his smartphone app has launched. In his particular case, he's not wearing his seatbelt, so what he's going to get is his seatbelt alert. And that's going to keep going off on the phone and auditory, asking him to buckle his seatbelt before he starts driving. It's in addition to the vehicle seatbelt one. The seatbelt alert will also go off if you're buckled and then you undo your belt for some reason while you're driving. The alert will go off as well. So we have that. The car with the squiggly lines in the middle is our best approximation of you driving aggressively, braking hard and swerving all over the road. That would be the alert that you'd get if you trigger the accelerometer monitoring in the car. So that alert's presented after the fact, which means that, well, and then we do stop sign violations wherever we have a stop sign database. So in the Twin Cities here, we had a stop sign database. So teens who ran through stop signs at greater than 5 miles per hour, a violation notice was sent to their parents. And when I talk about context-specific feedback, the stop sign one always is a really good example, because rolling through a stop sign, a lot of people roll through stop signs. In our usability study, we had teens say to us, like, my parents wouldn't care if I rolled through a stop sign. They do it all the time. Well, we know parents' behavior influences teen behavior. So, but teen drivers, like I said, are inexperienced. One of the things we know about teen drivers when they're learning to drive is they often look just directly in front of them. They tend to scan vertically. They're not good at scanning horizontally. What are you going to miss if you're driving down the road and a stop sign is partially obscured by a tree or by a car, or you're just too busy looking forward and you're not looking at the intersection where the stop sign is? You might blow through a stop sign. So we want to alert them of that. There's two reasons. It could be inadvertent. They didn't see the stop sign and they ran through it. Or it's people who deliberately run through the stop sign because they think it's okay. And so if you're a parent and you got a text message that said your teen went through the stop sign at 30 miles per hour, that's a lot different than your teen went through the stop sign at like 6 miles per hour. The risk is quite a bit higher. And you can have a different conversation with them about it. At the bottom there, you see our graduated speed warnings. There's a concept in transportation safety that's been around for a very long time called intelligent speed adaptation. It's literally just informing the driver of what the current speed limit is and then alerting them if they increase their speed over the speed limit. So what we do with our teens is we have the white zone is you're all okay, you're driving fine, you're matching the speed limit. The yellow zone is you're starting to speed a little bit, but we give them a little leeway because, as we know, traffic does tend to flow a little bit faster over the speed limit. And that's just a reality. Ideally, everyone would travel at the speed limit, but they don't. And you don't want to put a new teen driver out there going, 5 miles per hour less than everybody else on the road and potentially causing more problems. So we give them the yellow zone. We alert them of that. If they hit the red zone, that's considered excessive speeding. And then the phone starts to talk to them. And it says, reduce speed now, reduce speed now. You basically get 3 chances, 3 strikes and you're out. If you continue to speed, your parents get a text message telling them where you were, how fast you were going, and what the posted speed limit was. They can have a conversation with you later about that speeding. So this is all what's happening in the car with the teen driver. We have visual and auditory feedback, coaching them as they drive. If they're doing well, nothing's going on. That's great. They always see a speed limit sign if there's a speed limit in the database. So at a minimum, they'll always have that white speed limit sign up there. So if they get an alert, what we do is we have what we call near real-time feedback to the parents. So we leverage that text messaging capability of the smartphone, and we send them the messages that I've been talking about. And I really love this screenshot because this is when we were beta testing Nicole, and this is your aggressive driving that's showing up on the... Nicole is one of my colleagues from the Human First Laboratory. So we were all rigorously involved in beta testing and had to drive with this in our cars and follow the speed limit and all of that. So we text the parents. Again, like I said, you want the parents to have this information in real time so they can have a conversation with their teen as soon as possible. Oh, sped on the way home from school, dinner time. Oh, by the way, I saw you were speeding on the way home from school. Let's talk about that. The other thing is that if you're getting a lot of text messages, then you know that your teen has a problem. We do archive all the driving history on the website as well. What we know from previous research and now from our research is that people are terrible about going to websites. They are not going to go look at the website on a regular basis to see what their teen is doing. And we knew this years ago from some early work that was done, very, very early work that was done, that they eventually switched halfway through the study to sending weekly email updates to their participants because nobody was looking at the website. They weren't using text messaging. So we use text messaging, gets it to the parent on time and in a meaningful manner. And then again, what are we hoping to do? We're hoping to have that the parents and teens will have these nice back and forth conversations about driving, talk about driving limits, safe behaviors, and maybe if you're the parent who's getting 10 text messages a week, you're going to take your teen out and you're going to sit in the passenger seat and help them learn how to drive a little better and spend more time with them. So these are the goals of the system. So what we did is a 12-month field operational test. We deployed the system, the full system with in-vehicle feedback and parent feedback to a group of 100 teens recruited from Minnesota, newly licensed. They were all recruited around the age of 16. They were recruited prior to getting their license and then indicated interest in joining the study. And then when they called us and told us, yay, I passed my driver's license, we went, great, go get the equipment installed. And they went and they got the equipment installed. We handed them a brand new Galaxy S3 smartphone with the software on it and said, but you have to drive with this and you can't use any other phones. And they were pretty okay with that because it was a nice new phone. We also had a group where we just looked at giving them the in-vehicle feedback without the parent feedback. We're researchers, we're experimentalists. We want to make sure that the results we're seeing are actually due to the types of feedback. So incrementally, we want to know what's the additional effect of that parent feedback. I think this is also helpful for other technology domains because vehicle manufacturers right now are interested in potentially putting teen modules into their vehicles, but they don't want the hassle of reporting back to the parents. So if we can tell them something about how teens respond to feedback in the vehicle without parental involvement, that might help other designers out. So we did that. But for us specifically, we wanted to know the incremental increase of parent feedback on safety behaviors. And then we had a control group. Teen drivers naturally get better over time, so they start out potentially rough drivers, and then over the course of the year, they're going to become better drivers depending on how much driving they do. In terms of risky drivers, though, there's potentially within our control group and in all our groups a subset of teens who might always be risky, a subset of teens that are bad and get better, and a subset are like, you know, what we call the good, sort of like the risk averse. They're always fairly good drivers, and they don't really engage in risky behaviors at all. And then one of their parents had to participate with them and agree to receive all of the feedback from the system. So our expected outcomes were obviously that we wanted risky behaviors to be less frequent in both of those TDSS groups, but in particular the TDSS and parent group. Our hope was that parent feedback group, because we know from the psychological literature on teen drivers, parents are important, that they would have the lowest rates of observed risky behaviors during the study. And finally, we were hoping to see increased discussions between parents and teens about driving from the beginning of the study to the end. So we did do also a lot of qualitative and subjective data at enrollment, month 1, month 6, and month 12, asking them, parents and teens, about their relationship with each other, how they talked about driving, and things like that. I do not have all of that data to present to you today because it's a lot of written comment data, so we need to go through it and categorize it still. Like I said, we just finished data collection in July, so we have 12 months of data for 300 people, so we have a lot of work to do. So each of our 3 experimental groups had 6 subgroups in it that were matched on a number of variables. So socioeconomic status, commuting rates, which are low, medium, high. Commuting rate means just how frequently the population drives from their town to, say, another town to work. Or do most of the people, so if it's low, that means that most of the people in that town or city stay in that town or city to do their work and recreation. If it's high, that means most of the people leave their town or city to go do their work and recreational activities. Population, low, medium, high. So just like all drivers, rural teen drivers are at actually the most risk. So what we often find, I think approximately two-thirds of our fatalities are in rural drivers, both for teens and for all drivers. So we definitely wanted to look at the rural. And then we wanted to look at those suburban populations where the teens are definitely more likely to have a car as well. In the urban centers, they're less likely to have vehicles. We want to look at teens who are going to have that increased risk because they are driving frequently or have access to a car regularly. And we also did a cursory look at the fatal crash rates for teens, but those are we don't have a whole lot of fatal crashes every year for teens, so that's a little less controlled. Like I said, all data, I don't know if I said this yet, but all data was collected via the smartphone. We do it in real time, and we transmitted it out over the 4G network. If for some reason someone was in a rural area where they didn't have 4G, the data was cached on the phone, and then as soon as they had connectivity again, the data would be sent out to our servers. And then our data is constantly processed in real time. We determined all of our validation metrics and all of our dependent variables a priori, so that means we did it before the study. And one of the reasons for that was because we needed to be able to look at this data in real time on a daily basis and try to diagnose, was someone having an equipment problem, was someone not driving for some reason, for the obvious reasons that when you're trying to collect data, you want to make sure that you're getting all the data that you're supposed to be getting. So what would happen is if we hadn't seen someone driving for 7 days, we would give them a call, and then the parent would say, oh, no, it was a snowstorm, they didn't drive. We'd go, that's fine. Parents and teens themselves get to choose how much they drive or don't drive in the study. Or they would often say, oh, yeah, he broke his phone. Or, oh, yeah, she pulled the wire out of the in-vehicle device. Or, oh, we had one teen who bypassed the system by pulling the wire out of the device on a regular basis. So that was, we'll talk about that later too. So we did that. And that was just so that we would know at the end of the 12 months that our data was valid and that we would have a good set of data on which to base our analyses. So now the fun part. We have data. It's exciting. I don't know, you guys, maybe many people in the room are engineers, but as researchers and psychologists, we love to see data, and we love graphs, and we love statistics, and we're just do happy dances about it all. So speeding behavior, since that's the behavior that's most commonly monitored in the vehicle, that happens pretty much all the time while they're in the car. We're looking at the data, and as you can see, our control group, they have, remember, this is the group that has no feedback. All they have is just data collection in the car. They like to speed. I mean, I can't see the graph. It's like approximately, I think, 10% of their miles that they drive are speeding miles. And then if you look at our in-vehicle only group, the one that just had the in-vehicle coaching, that's the red line, and they have less speeding, a lower percentage of speeding. And then if you look at our parent feedback group, they have the lowest percentage of speeding. We have run statistical analyses on this. They are statistically significantly different. That means that our hypothesis that we would hope to see reduced speeding in the group with the parent feedback was met. We also saw it in that other TDSS group as well. And I am showing you here the data from daytime and nighttime. So most teens do their driving during daytime hours, so to and from school, after school activities. We also collected data from 9 to midnight and from curfew. We have very, very little curfew data. Our teens rarely drove after midnight, and I don't blame them because I like to be sleeping after midnight as well. Aggressive driving, this data is not as clean. Like I said, we had the requirement where the phone had to be mounted in the mount. What we determined is that people were, even though we give them an alert at the beginning of the drive saying, please place your phone in the mount, when the software launches, they weren't always good at it. In the control group, one of the reasons is because they want to use the phone while they were driving. In the other groups, it just depends. So there's less data for this available, but as you can see, we still have a difference there. When those teens know that their parents are going to get feedback, they perform better. And the interesting thing about this for me is that sort of one of the side hypotheses was that teens might be riskier or have more aggressive maneuvers early on simply because they had poor vehicle handling skills, so they would brake more roughly or accelerate more roughly early on. And we don't see that. That line in the parent feedback group is pretty smooth at the beginning. So I think what it talks to is what I know from my research on teen driving and driver education is kids actually do learn to handle the car very well, very quickly. So things like smooth braking and smooth accelerating, really what causes those aggressive maneuvers is truly risky and aggressive driving. So going too fast, not paying attention, things like that. Here's my favorite part. This is calling while driving. So, but Janet, you said that you blocked calling and texting on the phone. Yes, we did, but we had an open Bluetooth port because we are not the cellular phone provider and we can't actually block it completely. What we did, if you remember, is we suppressed all the incoming notifications, and we suppressed their ability to make outgoing calls and texts. So what happened is, during the course of our study, background apps for voice to text and voice to calling got a little more sophisticated. Our teens realized the Bluetooth was open, so then they were doing hands-free calling and texting while driving. There was also another issue where if they, which are bad for not picking it up in beta testing, if they started a call before they got in the vehicle, the software would launch, but the call would continue until the other person hung up. So they were able to get away with it that way as well. So what this tells you is that pretty much anyone who uses technology that's blocking them from doing something will try to bypass it. And our teens were somewhat savvy. But to be fair, not many of them figured it out. I think it was about 15 people in each of the TDSS groups, so 30 total out of 200 people figured this out. So not too bad. The nighttime driving data, I just want to caution you, because there's such a small amount of data. That's why you get weird ripples in the data. Even when we do our outlier analyses, it still looks like this. So there's some things going on there. But you can see again that the calling is still higher in that group. And so what's the danger at night? Well, they're driving in the dark now, and there's just an increased risk. We know that teens are more likely to crash at night too. Texting while driving looks the same. So we did a pretty good job of blocking them from texting. I think one of the most interesting things about this is that even when we clean the data for outliers, you see the teens get more confident in texting while driving over time. So you look around that 7-8 month mark, and it just starts going up significantly in that control group who has access to the phone, both for day and nighttime driving. We probably already had all made this assumption. Teens don't talk to each other anymore. They only communicate via "you are my friend" by text message. So they pretty much text while driving. Texting while driving is one of the most dangerous things you can do, because you're not only visually distracted because you're looking at the phone, you've got manual distraction. You sort of have this interaction of cognitive distraction, visual distraction, and then you probably only have one hand on the wheel as well. So you've just really increased your risk a lot versus making a cell phone call. However, they're very funny, because then when you ask them if they called or texted while driving, they're like, "No, I never do that." Of course not. So we get a lot of people in the control group who say they call or text sometimes or rarely. To be fair, our rates of calling and texting per mile are fairly low. They're less than, it's like 0.005 per mile driven. So it's a pretty low rate. But if you ask them if they do it, they say no. But if you ask the teens in the TDSS groups if they do it, they say, "Yeah, sure, I borrowed my friend's phone and I called while my system was running, but I used somebody else's phone to call." It wasn't very many of them, but again, there's like approximately 15, 17 teens per group that did this. So really what this says is that we have more to do in the domain if we want to use these kinds of applications on phones for any drivers to block calling and texting. There needs to be a better integration of keeping people from doing this. We haven't looked at the seatbelt data yet, but I have looked at it periodically throughout the study. Our teens have a very high compliance rate, greater than 90% for all of our groups typically, particularly early on in the study. Our teens in our control group drove more. They were blocked by geography. The teens in our control group, we didn't want them to know about the treatment groups. It's called blinding them. So we didn't want them to know that someone out there was getting feedback, because we didn't want that to contaminate the way that they and their parents interacted. We wanted it to be as naturalistic as possible. So that group was sort of like north of the Twin Cities, most of them. And I suspect now, in hindsight, looking at that, even though we tried to match by commuting rate and population and things like that, that they might have just been doing a lot more driving because there was longer distances between things. Or alternatively, it could be that the groups that had the feedback system, the parents were a little more aware of what was going on with their teens driving and limited their driving more. But we can't say that definitively right now. Reported crashes. I do want to note that this is self-reported crashes. We did not have a way to detect crashes with our software, so because we don't do video and we don't do anything like that. So we didn't know when crashes occurred. We asked them to basically report everything. So from backing up into a concrete bollard in a parking lot to rear-ending someone, or if someone hit them, we asked them all of those things. And so what you can see, though, is that when it comes to tickets, traffic tickets for speeding or warnings and citations, the groups are not that different. But when you look at the reported crashes per group, We're seeing more in the control group and fewer in the TDSS group, and then about the same amount in the 2 TDSS groups. We still do need to clean up this data a little bit. We have a number of questions that we have to correlate together. And what this is the number of teens who said they had a crash. So it's not actually the total number of crashes per se, it's the number of teens per group that said, I had a crash. There are teens who might have had 2 crashes or 3 crashes, but they were really bad at filling out that question on the questionnaire for some reason, so that one has gaps in it. In our usability study, we ran 30 teens, and in that, we were face-to-face with them and had their parents there, and we had 43% of them had an at-fault crash in the first year of driving. So the data actually does match our previous study fairly well. So what can I tell you? Teens crash a lot. But nicely in our TDSS groups, a little lower rate than in the control group. Perceptions of the system, how do people feel about it? Parents really like it. A lot of positive feedback from the parents. They would recommend it to other people. The teens were less favorable, but their consensus is kind of like, well, if it means I'm allowed to drive more, then I will do it. But one of the things that happens with parents that I just want to bring up, and it really is a new research question, another research question I'd like to delve into more, is that there's often a mismatch between the parents saying, oh, I really want to have this technology for my teen. It makes me feel like they're safer. It helps us talk more about safe driving. Except then you have parents who are like, they don't drive safely. So what they're actually role modeling in their driving doesn't match their expectations for their teens driving. And that's a bad thing, because when you remove the system, what's going to happen? Well, the teen now has this role model who's like, well, the system's done. Potentially they could go off and they would drive. They would just revert back to a riskier level of driving or copy their parents. So I think this is really interesting. We did not have the funding to do a follow-on study and look at that, whether there was any effects after we removed the system of how teens change their driving behavior. So we'll think about that. Yeah, so just in summary, overall, we did reduce most of the risky behaviors that we monitored were reduced in the TDSS groups, and in particular the parent feedback group. I think we basically helped just add another notch to the literature that says parents and guardians are important when it comes to teen driving. If they are involved and they know what their teens are doing, both parties, I think, feel more comfortable about how the teen is driving. One thing we hear a lot from parents is they're just not sure how to keep their teens safe. So their teen goes to driver's education, but they haven't had driver's education for 20, 25 years. Some of them don't even know what the new laws were. When we were doing informed consent process in the study, we were informing the parents and the teens of all the GDL laws, and it was amazing how many of the teens didn't know what some of the graduated driver licensing laws were, and they had literally just graduated from driver's education. So there is a role for technology in helping keep that fresh in both the teen and the parents' minds about what it really means to drive safely, both in the context of the law and behaviorally. I talked a lot about the texting and calling. I won't talk about that again. And really the ultimate goal is these mobile technologies are coming. I feel like we have done a really good job in leveraging the smartphone for this type of application. We have a lot of research behind it. There are a lot of applications on the market that don't have research behind them, so I feel confident in ours that we've done so much research that we know that what we're reporting and what we're measuring is what we say we're doing. So it's nice feedback. And just to give you an example, for those of us who did the beta testing, it's really hard for me to trigger the accelerometer. So if you think about hard braking, whenever I give a demo, someone always says, oh, can you trigger like a hard braking event? And I have to try like 2 or 3 times because I am just not that age anymore, and it doesn't feel comfortable to me. I've been driving for 23 years. It doesn't feel comfortable to me anymore, so I can't do it. So that should tell you when a parent calls me and is like, I don't think the system's working. They had like 15 excessive maneuvers this week. I'm like, oh my gosh, you need to talk to your teen about how they're driving. So that's it. I already talked about this. So there are a number of other issues, though. We don't want parents to just buy something like this off the shelf or download it off the internet and then think their teen is A-OK and being monitored. They need to have a good understanding of how the technology works, what it's measuring, how it's measuring it, and what it means in the context of driving. So a nice example we had was a parent who called us and said, oh, my son's getting an excessive maneuver alert in a roundabout, but it's okay, I know why he's getting it because it's not on the map. It's like, well, that's not triggered by the map. That's triggered by him going too fast around the roundabout, and he's pulling G-forces that set off the accelerometer. And then she went, oh. And then she called us back a couple days later and said, yeah, we're not getting those alerts anymore. So one of the things we know when it comes to reliability, usability, and trust in technology is that the users need to really understand how it works. That has to be fairly transparent. And so that is another challenge for these types of technologies, is that although this seems very transparent on the surface when you see the feedback and you drive with it, there still might be these understanding of how people use it. So you don't want them to discount an event, and you don't want them to put too much weight potentially in an event if they don't know how it's being measured. So we want to calibrate people how to use this technology appropriately as a tool, not as a, it's not a, can't think of the word. It's a tool, it's a support tool. It's not meant to replace the parent in coaching their teen in driving. This is what I would like to say. That's it. Thank you very much. And I will take any and all questions.
I just want to say that, questions should come through the microphone, but people who are off in internet land, they have a screen in front of them, and in the right window at the very top, they'll see a little icon of an envelope. If they want to enter a question or any or put any other information in, there's a little button or a little dot next to the envelope, and that's what they should click on. So for those of you who are off there paying attention and have issues and questions, please type your question into that particular window, and it will be read to us by Kylie, who's sitting here in the back of the room. Anybody have any questions or issues? Yeah, okay.
I'm just curious for the case of texting or calling while driving, because you were measuring that, what the distinction between moving versus driving is. If the engine's running but they're at a stoplight, were you considering that differently or not?
Oh, so we given the amount of data we had, we could look at that. We don't, and we didn't pre-process it, so we're not going to look at that. What teens need to know, and actually everyone in this room in Minnesota needs to know, that it's also illegal to text message while you're stopped at a stop sign. So but to answer another part of your question, so one of the issues that we do have with this blocking software, because the software launches when the vehicle is running, is that if the teen needs to just pull over and make it, like say they pull into a parking lot and they want to make a phone call, they do need to turn off the car in order to do that. And I didn't mention it, it was on the slide, but we do have a 911 button on our phone as well. So you are allowed to call 911 while driving. We would never want a teen to be in a situation where they feel threatened or unsafe, like they're being harassed, and they get in their car and want to drive away and can't call 911. So they definitely can call 911. But yeah, that is a technological issue that still needs to be dealt with. So yeah.
Were the aggressive driving moves, or whatever they were called, the excessive G-forces, could those be categorized into like a legitimate defensive move if you almost hit a deer or something? Or like could you put an asterisk on it, like, yeah, that one was okay or whatever?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So there is a device on the market. We cannot do that. We do not collect video. So one of the limitations of a smartphone application is that we don't collect video. We don't look inside the cab of the vehicle, and we don't look at the roadway outside. So when an excessive event happens, it's an excessive event. The message goes to the parent, and then the parent and teen need to talk about it and figure out what happened and why it happened. And maybe it was a deer, or maybe it was a dog, or maybe it was they weren't paying attention and the light turned red and they had to stop. We don't know, so that is a limitation of this. There are technology solutions on the market. Pretty much up until till our system did the FOT, everything on the market is accelerometer based only, but they are video based. So they are able to do that. But what that requires is a center with a bunch of trained coders who go through the video every week, and they get a lot of like null events. They get a lot of like, oh, I went over a speed bump and that was an excessive maneuver with their system. We smooth ours by GPS and how fast the car is moving, so we're less susceptible to those kinds of things. As far as I know, don't want to put words in my engineers' mouths. But in those particular cases, they are able to look at that. So if they saw that someone had braked or swerved to avoid a deer, that video would still go to the family, but the coaching that goes along with it would be potentially, your teen did the right thing, they noticed that well in advance and made the correct maneuver or whatever. So that's the advantage of video, and there is a study ongoing right now in Iowa with that particular technology to try and determine, similar to what we did, do you need the video or can you just look at the excessive maneuvers? Because obviously that video processing takes a lot of time, it costs a lot of money. That's one of the advantages. So we have some limitations with our smartphone application, but the advantage is it's lower cost, you can put it on your own device, and you're ready to go. So I sound like a marketing person. I'm not really, I'm a researcher. But those were some of the issues that we considered when we were addressing the technology and what it should do. Yes, Kylie?
What do you think about the new vehicles that have like an accessibility to your phone connecting to it? So like I know, for example, the Jeep like Cherokee, I think, you can actually read your text messages right in front of you. In terms of psychology, what do you think of something, of a technology like that? And
there's been a lot of research on that. I haven't looked at it closely recently. We do know that there is cognitive overhead associated with any visual reading while you're driving. Driving is primarily a visual task, so anything that diverts your eyes from the roadway is going to be problematic. All the work that came out of VTTI's naturalistic driving study and the distraction guidelines is that glances of longer than 2 seconds away from the roadway greatly increase your risk. But the number of glances sometimes, like if you're trying to really look back and forth quickly to read something, you might lose some awareness of what's going on in the world just because you're not looking at it consistently. When we're talking about voice-to-text or voice-to-call applications, I think there is still overhead associated with those. I think, Nicole, you've read something recently, and they are still seeing distraction effects associated with trying to compose messages mentally and then speak them. It's not something we're accustomed to, so it's something people have to learn. Probably, given that we're human, the more someone did it, the better they would get at it. It'd become less distracting over time, potentially. For me, in particular, when I think about safety applications that can run on a mobile device or in a vehicle, I feel like the integration of a smartphone where you always have a consistent place to mount it that makes sense, and then it goes into your vehicle. I mean, imagine if we could present this information onto the vehicle center stack screen. That would just eliminate all the issues associated with the cell phone right there, but you could still have the app be something accessible to everyone who has a smartphone. And then if you had a car where you could do that, you could port it out to the things. So port it out to the screens in the vehicle. So yeah.
This is only slightly related. I'm just curious. If someone was to get in an accident while this was running, you are collecting the GPS and the speed and the other data. Would that have anything to do possibly with insurance and determining who's at fault?
Okay, so yeah. Those are still issues to be determined with a lot of these technologies. I've been quite involved in the big push with automated vehicles lately, and the liability people there get really excited about who's responsible. When it comes to data collection things, it's a similar issue. For our particular research study, we have what's called a certificate of confidentiality from the NIH, where we cannot be compelled to give up the data in a crash. And in fact, what we tell our participants is like, just don't tell anyone that you have data collection. You'll just don't even open that can of worms. So for our study, that's not an issue. For future applications like this, whether they're run through a vehicle manufacturer's system, through a phone, through another device, then that does become an issue of safety and liability. Insurance companies are very interested in telematics technologies like this for that very reason. They want to adjust your rates based on what they perceive their algorithm says you drive, rather than on actuarial tables of age and gender and things like that. They really want to see that. So I think we're going to see more conversations about that as these things start to explode on the market. Yeah. And I'm a psychologist, not a policy expert.
I think the idea of can you hear me? So I think the idea of the parent monitor is very good. It's actually a good idea, but I just wonder that you mentioned about the screen. It's just located upright in the window, and the teens tend to look straight forward and less on the latitude direction. So I wonder if, like over time, by applying this application, does it change the teens' behavior of searching for the safety hazards in the environment, and how would it affect it, and is there any like negative effects?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And again, we were not able to do the follow-on. So what we would have liked to have done is at the end of our study, then collect data, remove the system from the people who had it, and you would typically collect data for another period of time, and we might be able to see that. I would expect, knowing what I know about behavioral adaptation to these types of technologies, that one of our goals in designing this is that, one, we don't always have a speed limit. So the good news is we only have a speed limit about 70 to 75% of the time on the road, which means that other 25 to 30% of the time the teen is having to look and scan and do those things. Our goal was really to be a support tool. We did our best to design it as a support tool that wouldn't limit their ability to gain the experience of scanning the world. But can I say for certain that some teams wouldn't become dependent on always just checking that for the speed limit versus the roadway? I can't. I do know that in Europe, there's a big push for intelligent speed adaptation for just that reason, that speed signs are becoming, the world's becoming more cluttered, they're harder to see. If you can have it in the vehicle, that's okay. That's an okay place to have a speed sign. But yeah, you still need a way to help people learn how to scan the environment appropriately. So, yeah. And that comes over, that's actually a habit that's learned over time. It takes about 6 to 12 months for teens to get to look more like an experienced driver in their visual patterns. So,
I just want to make an announcement for our remote attendees. Our comment bubble on the webinar is not working currently. We are trying to fix it, but just so you know, if you are trying to ask a question on the webinar, it is not working, so we do apologize.
I'd like to add a comment. I was just at a meeting in Detroit these last few days, and I had a lengthy conversation with the Swedish Road Authority and Administration, and they told me that if the speed limit is not in a digital database, then it's not a speed limit that you can get a ticket for. So they basically have a national speed limit database that documents every speed limit in every town, every city, every county, and if it's not in the database, you cannot get a ticket, period.
Yeah.
And we are way behind the 8 ball in this area, because I can tell you that our digital databases of speed limits are way back in the Stone Age. They are still on pieces of paper in filing cabinets. So we have a long way to go if we are going to have an impact in reducing the high rate of speed that we begin to see. And yes, what Janet talked about is in effect intelligent speed adaptation in some sense, and yes, one day maybe this will apply to all of us as we drive along, but we're not there yet. And it would be interesting. Some of the seminar topics will talk about the speed limits and automated speed enforcement and some of those issues. In Sweden and many European countries, there is automated speed enforcement. When I told them that it was illegal in the state of Minnesota, they could not believe it. It made absolutely no sense to them whatsoever. What more can I say? Did everybody sign in? I want to be sure that everybody in the room put their name and affiliation and email address into that document. I just want to let you know next week, tune in again or come on over. We're going to have Hugo Zhao from Auburn University in Alabama. By the way, the CEO Cook of Apple is an alumnus of Auburn University. I thought that was kind of an interesting coincidence. But anyway, Zhao will be talking about wrong-way driving. Those of you who follow the news, about 2 weeks ago, there was a huge wrong-way driving crash here right next to I-35W, not very far from here. And anyway, Hugo Zhao will be talking about wrong-way driving crashes and the very important work he's been doing on tracking wrong-way crashes and coming up with countermeasures. And in fact, we're working with them on coming up with some new countermeasures related to reducing the very large number of wrong-way crashes. This is a big issue in Illinois. It's an issue in other states around the country as well. So again, Hugo Zhao, tune in or come here 1 week from today, 3 o'clock. Any other questions or issues? I know we've run out of time. If no other issues, those of you who are registered for the class, if you have any questions you want to talk about, please see me after class. I will certainly entertain email questions as well. If there's nothing further, thank you very much, and let's thank the speaker again for her presentation.